I was told two things that were certain to happen. One, that it was certain to happen that Governor Abbott was going to veto SB3 in Texas, that the memo had been written, that it was a done deal, that it was going to be done, and that the polling was 80-20 in favor of a veto, and it was a done deal. And the second thing that was going to happen was that the Trump White House was going to move behind that veto to move the rescheduling conversation and do it in a more expedited fashion than had been.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finnig. And this week, we got a very special guest, Jim Higdon, co-founder of Cornbread Hemp and U.S. Hemp Roundtable. Jim, thanks for taking time. How you doing today?
Brian, Kellen, it's great to see you guys. Doing great.
Excited to dive in. Kellen, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thrilled to talk to Jim today. I mean, just met him a couple weeks ago. I feel like we're best friends, you know? How you doing, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think we got a really good dive at Benzinga of trying to understand the piece of the puzzle that I still can't really understand.
It's wild.
And I think Jim did a really good job of kind of like laying out the structure and the implications and what it all means. So we'll talk about Texas. We'll talk about the closing of the loophole. But before we do that, Jim, I think it's even better. Is there a future in your mind where hemp, cannabis all can align? Is there a direction that we're moving where it makes sense for both parties to kind of diverge?
I'm always working in my space in the hemp world for greater cannabis freedom, greater cannabis regulation, full plant descheduling. That's always our goal. That's always our plan. And, you know, we're getting chirped at on the sidelines by people who don't understand that. And, you know, like regulated cannabis, regulated marijuana is living inside of a cage. And they're mad that the hemp industry is outside of their cage and they're trying to drag us into a cage that we're trying to free them from. In the process, they're trying to drag us down. And it's frustrating, but this is why lifeguards are trained to go underwater when the people they're trying to save try to drown them. Because like you gotta save yourself to save somebody else. And we're in the process of doing, you know, like of legalizing cannabis by having legal hemp out of the cage and working to, you know, reschedule and deschedule cannabis at the same time. It's a difficult lift, especially, you know, relative to Congress and the White House and the administration, current administration and former administration. We're just not a priority there. But in the process of creating regulations for hemp, we are laying the groundwork for legal cannabis.
So just to be clear, so I understand, right? We're talking about, from when you talk about like the cage, you're talking about like the regulatory, the legal cannabis, the MSOs in those aspects and all the infrastructure that they've built out and all those rules and regs that they've had to abide by in order to get off the ground.
Sure. Marijuana, the type of cannabis that remains illegal under federal law, in order to exist and to serve customers, has to not engage in interstate commerce and abide by all these rules and regulations that are just really burdensome and onerous that a normal company, a normal industry would never have to go, you know, would never have to bear. Even before we talk about 280 tax penalties and shit. Like just the simple fact that an MSO has to recreate its entire supply chain inside of a state and not export ingredients or halfway completed products from one state to another, that burden alone is a cage. And then on top of that, the state taxes that these folks have to pay in order to fund the regulatory enforcement of this strict standard, because it has to be strict because it remains illegal under federal law. So there's no federal guidance or oversight or function that can provide what the state has to provide for these things. So it's just like it's just a fact that state legal cannabis is a cage, a necessary cage in order to create that economy until it's legal under federal law. It has to be in this cage, but it's a midpoint. It's not an end point for what good cannabis regulation ought to look like. It's just what's necessary because it's illegal under federal law. Once we get it, you know, Schedule 3 and then descheduled, it's a different ballgame. We all should be looking towards what a descheduled cannabis regulatory scheme will look like for full-strength cannabis flower, concentrates, vapes, etc., because that's where this is all going. And right now, hemp is already there, at least on the congressional legalized side. We still need regulations, and we're working on that. But in the meantime, like, we're the camel nose under the tent. Hemp is what legal cannabis is going to look like, and getting rules of the road for hemp, for cannabinoid product regulations will allow for regulations for cannabinoid products that are legal today, which are hemp, and for cannabinoid products that are legal tomorrow, which is full strength cannabis. So we're all working together, at least from my perspective, we are. It's just frustrating that not everyone always sees it that way.
I think that was clear and definitely fair on a lot of sides. But I want to ask you to put your other hat on, right? Let's say you're the leader of a large MSO that had to invest in infrastructure for some of these states. You had to fight all those onerous rules and regs that we all agree are unnecessary, definitely limiting, but that was the way the game was in the current stage. Do you think, or how would you feel in those shoes, and what would you think then to like figure out how both can make sense? Because at the end of the day, right, that's probably some of the challenge, I would assume, right, is that they've invested in this infrastructure, they've laid the groundwork, they've done all the lower level elements that you talked about. But if you were wearing their hat, where makes sense now?
All right. Well, I'll put on two hats at once because I think that this question, like, I see the legal marijuana industry in sort of more than one basket. You have MSOs, and then you also have smaller business operators that are operating, at a smaller level below those MSOs. And the MSOs have more flexibility because they have more capital. And some of those MSOs have seen the writing on the wall and have come over on to the hemp side to join us in the hemp space. Like with beverages and with edibles, they're doing what? Well, we should just do that. Like we should just do that. And that's what, I'm not gonna, advertise for those MSOs, but that's what those MSOs are doing. Now, but below those MSOs, you have independent operators in the cannabis space that are really maybe the hardest hit by all of this because they're so emotionally invested in the companies that they have built in the confines that they're allowed to, and now they're seeing competition on the hemp side. And for some of those folks, they're so emotionally invested in what they've been able to create that it's difficult for them to see outside of it. And that's just, I have a lot of empathy for those operators. Like it's tough to
They
have
put their life, right? They put their life savings into it. They thought
it's
they
a
were
vision, right? Folks want to be involved in be operators in the cannabis industry. Like it's a dream for a lot of us. And you invest in what you've invested in only to see, something happen on the other side of the fence. So the MSOs are doing what the MSOs are going to do. They're going to choose or not choose to participate on the hemp side. Some of them already have. That's just a decision of capital. It's really what's heartbreaking is the step below, like independent operators below those MSOs having a tough time.
So I think that's perfectly alluded to, right? And that's what I really wanted to ask about after is like how do those people, how did they shake out in this situation? Because they entered a market with the assumptions and the rules of where it is, and now this big push forward, which you're right, everyone wants to happen, and everyone thinks is the better approach, but then you got the congressional stuff. How do those people, the small people we talked about, how do they shake out and make it through, given they pretty much went all in order to get set up?
I mean, it's tough. We're rooting for them. I mean, when I travel to legal states, I'm their customers. The politics on this always takes time. And it's, and the time we have to spend at the federal level advocating for policy change always includes advocating for policy change for these folks. I feel like, the rescheduling conversation in the last administration was unnecessarily burdensome. There was this administrative law hearing that ended up at the DEA where everything kind of ran off the rails was not required by statute. It was done as a suspenders and belt type thing to make everything to do everything that they possibly could in the last administration to do things, a correct way, but it wasn't necessary by statute. And so we'll see when this administration decides to prioritize this issue, how they go about the rescheduling process. As I understand the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, the only thing that's required to reschedule or deschedule a drug is HHS secretary referring it to the attorney general who signs off on it, and it's done. And if Secretary Kennedy sends Pam Bondi as attorney general a declaration of rescheduling or descheduling, all the attorney general has to do is sign it. There doesn't need to be an administrative law court hearing at the DEA to do it. And if the president wants it done, it can be done. It can be done in an afternoon, as I understand it. So we'll see when this administration decides to prioritize it, and then maybe those smaller operators can get some relief, especially, rescheduling to Schedule 3 to give relief from 280E at least.
Does that make it a fair playing field, though?
It's still not. I mean, it's
No,
still
yeah,
not
right.
like
Totally.
they're still going to be illegal under federal law, and not until the FDA approves Schedule 3 drugs that are cannabis. Like, and maybe the rules in FDA's has been hostile to us from the beginning. They said they were going to issue regulations for as dietary supplements. Or, I'm sorry, maybe they didn't say it. One, the assumption was after the 2018 Farm Bill that the FDA would issue regulations. And those regulations never came. And then a couple of Januaries ago, the FDA said, you know what, we're not going to issue those regulations. We need more authority from Congress to regulate hemp products. Now, maybe the rules from FDA are different now under the current administration. We don't know that yet. And so if the FDA would issue dietary supplement regulations for full spectrum hemp products that are CBD dominant but include THC, that would be the first time that cannabinoid products have been regulated by the federal government. If it takes additional legislation, Senator Wyden is proposing that regulation in a bill that he introduced last Congress, and I believe he has drafted and is working to reintroduce this Congress with a Republican co-sponsor. And there's a House version of that bill as well, and that bill is meant to regulate cannabinoid products, and that would provide one, some rules for the road for hemp products nationally, including like labeling guidance, which is desperately needed, some sort of potency cap for low dose products, and some guidance for states that they can build on if they wanted to. And that would be guidance for cannabinoid products that are legal today, and it would be the groundwork for regulating full strength marijuana once that becomes legal. Because what folks on the marijuana side should learn from the hemp industry is that legalization by Congress is only half the battle. You get legalized, that's great, but if you don't get regulated, where are you? And it's this space that we're in now in hemp, which is like neither here nor there. And it's not a great place to be. Like, legalizing is great, but we need regulations to allow good actors and good products to make it to market.
And sensible ones, right? Ones that at least are logical and rooted in science and facts, right? Versus where we currently are, which is like you're saying, is like it's in a cage. And I guess then the higher level arching is that eventually these two tracks are going to have to be merged into one. It's just a matter of which way it ends up going.
And there's a lot of operators already talking about a one plant solution to all this. Like, and essentially breaking down into high dose, low dose, micro dose markets where high dose, full strength marijuana concentrates are always going to be in a dispensary like setting. And there's always going to be a niche in the marketplace for dispensaries selling flower and high dose products. And that's where those products belong. And then low dose, 10 milligram per serving and below beverages and edibles can exist in the marketplace anywhere where age gating happens, whether that's liquor store, grocery store, convenience store. All those products can also pay into the excise tax regime to support regulations in these products and the greater marijuana marketplace in that state. And then, microdose wellness products with below, 5 milligrams of THC, but high CBD content, those are going to be available in pharmacies and natural health food stores and places where people are going to look for relief from pain, anxiety, and sleep, and who are not dispensary customers, right? Like Cornbread's made our place in the market, initially as a full strength gummy company in D2C. And our customers, we know our customers are mostly like women in the suburbs looking for relief from pain, anxiety, and sleep. They are not dispensary customers. We're not stealing customers away from dispensaries. We're creating new customers in the cannabis marketplace.
Do you think Congress understands the nuanced differences of the two tracks and how they've made it a little more complicated? And then when both sides are trying to communicate to them the differences and the benefits and the negatives, don't you think it's maybe too much for them, where they're just like, I don't know, like this is too hard? Or you think they understand, right? They understand the differences, they understand the loophole, and they know what they're voting on when these new regulations get pushed by the House and the committee?
It depends on the member of Congress, and the weight of hemp to a member of Congress really depends on the state they're in. It's easy for folks who take for granted the regulated cannabis market in the populous states that people live in with regulated cannabis markets, that these don't exist in other places. Texas does not have a flower market. And Texas is a giant state, both geographically and by population. It's giant. And there's no dispensaries in Texas. So how are the millions of veterans in Texas accessing cannabis if it's not through, illegal drug dealers and out of the trunk of a Trans Am in a parking lot. Like, it's 2025 in America. Every American needs access to some sort of THC product, whether that's a hemp product or a cannabis or a marijuana product. Like, is really indifferent to the consumer in the marketplace. It just needs to be safe and effective and tested and age gated so that kids aren't getting it. And one thing that we've learned from, like, from hemp is that the vision of what anyone thought legalization would look like, this ain't it. Like, legalization is a messy process and it's an uneven process. And we're existing in part of that uneven phase right now. But when we got to, when we saw each other 2 weeks ago in Chicago, I told you that we're living in the future that Texas is giving us, and we just don't know what that future is right now. Like, we were all just kind of in like what's it going to be? And people were like, he's going to veto. And other people were like, that's great. That sounds great, but it's the governor of Texas. And so I'll believe it when I see it. And we got what the optimists said was going to happen. And Texas vetoing a total THC ban means that prohibition doesn't stick in Texas. And if prohibition isn't welcome in Texas, then, like, where's it good? We're like it, the only places where hemp products have been prohibited outside of Texas is like Arkansas, and Arkansas's got a robust medical program. So, like prohibition is dead, and members of Congress are going to see that, going to understand that, and the entire Texas congressional delegation has certainly felt that. And now they got to decide which side they're on, because the days of prohibition are numbered when the governor of Texas vetoes it.
The genie can't go back in the bottle.
I mean, no, like, not in Texas.
I think for our listeners, though, can you set up the two main players and kind of what the bill was? Because I think you did a really good job of making it really easy to understand, right? Because
you're going to get me in trouble because
you made it easy for us to understand.
Right. And we're invested in the cannabis space, and we're focused on the THC stuff. But just know that, like, it could very well be the case that the nature of this had very little to do with THC, that it's just power politics writ large, and that Texas is a Shakespearean play of power that we're just a tool of somewhere in Act 3 of a 5-act play. So, and again, you're going to get me in trouble because
it's just the three of us.
We have to, yeah. But the lieutenant governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, is a powerful person. And the way that Texas is structured is that the lieutenant governor is also president of the Senate, which puts him in a very powerful position to run a whole chamber of a 2-chamber legislature. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is a very effective wielder of that power. He understands that power and he wields it well. So well that it was told to me by people in Texas that I met that other members of the Senate are afraid of him, that he runs the Senate with fear. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's the sense that one gets in Texas, is that the lieutenant governor runs the Senate, and people are afraid of his retribution. And then he went over to the House and ran the House by forcing the House to vote in favor of his version of this bill, even though there was a competing House bill that was actually quite good. Chairman Ken King from the Texas committee that was working on a regulatory bill, like, took some time, but came out with a regulatory bill that was actually quite good. Taxed hemp products of, like, at a reasonable way, and was taxing it by milligram of THC and not by gallon. Like, there was some thought that went into this and was done well. And Chairman King really earned my respect to this process as someone who was willing to learn, trying to do it the right way, trying to get something right that would pass. But Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, came in to the House side, stepped on Chairman King's bill, and forced a vote on his bill. Now, if you're the governor and your lieutenant governor already controls one chamber of the legislature, do you want your lieutenant governor controlling both chambers of the legislature? And generally speaking, the answer to that would be no. You do not want someone who's subordinate to you controlling an entire separate branch of government that's equal to you, because that just makes your lieutenant governor, who's supposed to be your subordinate, your equal. And that has created a power dynamic challenge in Texas, where the lieutenant governor until the veto had elevated him to an equal power to his supposed boss. So what this veto has done is the boss of this situation has told his subordinate, you belong down here, not up here. The flavor of what he's vetoing is essentially secondary. Like THC doesn't have anything to do with it except for the fact that it was the lieutenant governor's calculus, presumably, that his boss would not veto this bill because there's an election year next year. And to veto a THC bill would be to expose yourself as governor to your right flank in a Republican primary and make you vulnerable in a Republican primary if you veto this bill. So it's set up this crazy Shakespearean power dynamic that, did I use the metaphor knife fight in a phone booth? Is that this conversation? Knife fight in a phone booth between two very skilled political operators. But the lieutenant governor appears to just overplay his hand. And Tony Fabrizio, who's Trump's pollster, comes into Texas, polls this issue, and found it to be an 80-20 issue. Only 20% of Texans agreed with the lieutenant governor. And then when you look at that inside of a Republican primary electorate, which in Texas is really the only electorate that counts for statewide offices, the popularity of SB3 only increased to like 35% with 48 in favor of a veto. So while not quite a majority, a plurality of Republican primary voters in Texas disagreed with the lieutenant governor. So his power play against his boss was essentially like he just overplayed his hand, and the governor called him on it. And that's the situation we're in now. Now the lieutenant governor is still holding that card and expecting to replay SB3. So, when the special session comes around in late July, what we're going to see is presumably something very similar to Chairman Ken King's bill coming through the House, and then we'll see where it gets in the Senate. Meanwhile, it's a special session, so any other topic that's being heard during the special, could all be subject to horse trading one issue to another. So we could end up with something crazy because of some backroom deal because it's the special session in Texas in the middle of the summer. So, it's going to be 110 degrees. Everyone's going to be trying to get home. We'll see what happens.
Why do you think he overplayed his hand, right? And then there had to be an understanding that Trump, right, would want to be somewhat involved or aware of what's happening and maybe influence it in one way or the other. So why do you think he overplayed his hand?
It's easy in a Republican echo chamber to think that THC is the same whipping boy that it's always been as an issue forever until it wasn't. It's not unlike gay marriage, which was a whipping boy for, liberals got beat to death with gay marriage until all of a sudden gay marriage was done. And if you were on the wrong side of that, the shift happened fast. Yeah. And it seems like we're on the same paradigm. Nothing happens forever, and then things happen really fast all at once. And Dan Patrick caught himself on the wrong side of the tipping point.
How much do you think hemp had to play with that whole paradigm shift?
Yeah, hemp.
Intoxicating hemp, right? Of course.
Hemp-derived THC products.
Small part of Texas.
Changed.
Small part.
It changed public perception of THC because it exists. It's legal. The world hasn't ended.
Yeah.
And people are okay with it. And is it a nuisance on the side of the road with flags that say THC on them? Is it like an eyesore sometimes? Yeah, but is that it? People were drumming up this, it's dangerous for children stuff, which is where the lieutenant governor of Texas is. But when the governor of California was defending his ban in court, he could find one death associated with THC gummies. One, a tragedy of a 4-year-old toddler in Virginia. One. But, one death in 10 years is not a statistic. It's just a tragedy. And that's not that's not enough to move policy.
How big is the THC market in Texas?
I mean, the number I keep hearing is 8 billion.
So they were going to end an $8 billion market?
Yeah. Again, because they thought that THC and marijuana was the same whipping boy that it was in 1971. in the Nixon administration, right? Where you could divide and conquer with the silent majority by saying like, the marijuana is bad because of the
Devil's
hippies and the
lettuce.
blacks.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore because people know that's bullshit.
The job aspect and just the staggering number that you just shared, like that's the information when we just like pull it back and say, okay, both sides. That is the numbers that Congress should be understanding. The jobs, the revenue, the tax opportunities, all of these changes should be the most influential, plus the scientific aspects, which I know we're all trying to get forward.
I mean, look, the scientific stuff is secondary. Like until you solve the cultural, political issue, like no one, like the science is just used to justify whatever everybody's emotionally feelings are. Like the science is great, but it just bolsters what people want to feel. Like it's the feeling stuff. Like, and like, big, strong Republican men don't want to admit that they have feelings, but all of their politics are dictated by their feelings.
I mean, I agree, right? You look at any state that does a medical program and then they open up the recreational market and like the medical market just like
Crashes.
completely goes away. It's like,
My anxiety's still my anxiety though, Kellen, right? It's just a matter of my anxiety only stopped when I left New York. I wasn't allowed to bring it to other states.
So your anxiety is like, I'll pay more in taxes on the rec side if I don't have to deal with a card.
yeah.
There it is. But I still have anxiety, right? Like it's still there. It's just, I just need the products either way. Like, let's just.
Yeah. And alcohol consumption is dropping to the floor, right?
Yeah.
Like, and like as we squabble inside of the cannabis industry between, people in the adult use market on the hemp side, meanwhile, distilled spirits manufacturers, winemakers, and their distributors are, throwing rocks on us from the top of the cliff, and they've had 100 years to generate political capital to do it. We're getting, like it's just the latest massive established industry that we've pissed off. And so, marijuana and hemp need to work together because our enemies are significantly more established than us.
And super rich.
Well, not just, super rich.
Capital,
like,
resources, influence.
Like the political structures of those groups are sophisticated and well funded and well established, and we're just wandering in, like, hey, this room looks great, and no, it doesn't. This room belongs to someone else.
We own this room. So I think you said it perfectly, right? Like if Prohibition doesn't work in Texas, probably doesn't work much anymore. But then it makes me wonder, as this starts to percolate a little more, Trump and his perspective on trying to have federal oversight and his influence, understanding the party, what do you think his role here is? And do you think he was watching the Texas situation pretty closely?
All right. So, the Benzinga conference in Chicago was great. It allowed a bunch of people, like, it was my first one. I know those happen a lot, but something we mean to do more of, to get out into the real world and see folks, because you get to see folks in the sidelines you don't, get to see very often. And in a very good conversation that I had with some people on the sidelines Monday night of Benzinga, I was told two things that were certain to happen. One, that it was certain to happen that Governor Abbott was going to veto SB3 in Texas, that the memo had been written, that it was a done deal, that it was going to be done, and that the polling was 80-20 in favor of a veto, and it was a done deal. And the second thing that was going to happen was that the Trump White House was going to move behind that veto to move the rescheduling conversation and do it in a more expedited fashion than had been envisioned during the Biden administration. And since then, thing one's happened. Things one happened exactly like it was told to me that it would happen. The polling was 80-20, that it was going to happen, that a special session, like blah, 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 like to a T, to the number on the polling that had not yet been released in Benzinga, but then got published that week. Like, it all checked out. So if what I've been told on part one was true, then the second part was that, Tony Fabrizio did the polling in Texas, and Tony Fabrizio is Trump's pollster. He's not in the White House, but he's on the campaign side, and he's the guy. And so if he's doing the polling for Texas, he's clearly doing it probably internally for the Trump campaign as well, the Trump team. And if the Trump White House wanted to move in an expedited fashion to reschedule or deschedule cannabis, they can do it. If they want to use Texas as cover to to make that happen, they can make that happen. It's just a matter of priority. It's just a matter of having time in the day to do it. They just have to make it a priority.
When you say expedited, right? Because at first you said it could happen in an afternoon. When you say expedited, with politics, it could be expedited, it could be end of the year, it could be early 2026, it could be in an hour. What does expedited mean?
My understanding of the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which created the schedule of drugs that we're dealing with today, the prison that we live in with cannabis as Schedule 1, along with LSD and heroin, which is like a political bullshit designation, not a medical science-based decision. The way to change that, the way to reschedule or deschedule a drug on the schedules, according to the Controlled Substances Act, as I understand it, could require congressional action, or it could be done by the Secretary for Health and Human Services referring a rescheduling, descheduling decision to the Attorney General, who then signs off on it and then sends it to the president, and it's done. It doesn't require a whole bunch of bureaucracy. It's a whole bunch of bureaucracy, but all it requires is 3 people: chairman or the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Attorney General, and the president. And if those 3 people got in a room, then they can make it happen in an afternoon. The administrative law judge at the DEA and the hearing and the this and the that, like, that's not required by statute. That was just more bullshit that the Biden administration put on it to try to make it palatable to whoever. It's not necessary by statute. 3 people could do it in an afternoon.
Are there signals we should watch for to know that this is getting closer and closer? Or do you think it could be one where we just see major breaking news and reschedule?
Interesting. Anything of Trump going to Texas or Trump and the governor of Texas, something would be a signal. Anything on Truth Social from 2 or 3 a.m. where you just fire something off, like who knows where it's going to come from? Like, it's the world we live in. Like, who knows? But they could send a signal in any way. But, some sort of communication between the governor of Texas and the White House would be a strong signal.
I didn't know if there'd be any other bills that you'd expect to come forward as cover fire, or ones that you think is a precursor for more regulation.
Well, we've seen the House Appropriations bill with THC killing, hemp killing amendments from Andy Harris of Maryland pass out of committee and go to the House floor. So we'll have a House floor fight on appropriations relative to the hemp program soon. And so we might see a signal, whether the president supports or is indifferent to a fight on the House floor on that issue, or how it shakes out in the Senate. Could be a signal in that fight as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying to position all the pieces in my mind and understand, right? The dynamics of the pieces and what's a signal and what's just fluff and what's actually influence. And then from your perspective, right? How are obviously Andy Harris is pushing against you guys, but is there an opportunity where that bill gets squashed and then another one comes forward? How do all these pieces come together? How can we make sense of this to say, okay, this is what's good, this is how things move forward, this is how we can be unified front? Because I loved what you positioned that as, is that both sides need to come together. They're both working on the same side, but they need to figure out how to come together and then fight the right fight.
So there's a couple, first of all, the chances of a farm bill passing this year is as likely as they were last year or the year before, right? We're 3 years behind on the farm bill.
Always next year.
It's only a 5-year farm bill. So really we're just we just lost a farm bill, essentially. Because of congressional inaction, and
we'll get them next time.
Republicans using the farm bill in a partisan way to gut free school lunch and the WIC program and the SNAP program and food programs that feed poor people, but also pay farmers to grow the food that feeds poor people, are on the chopping block. And so therefore no Democrat will vote for it. It requires every Republican vote. And when there's an issue in the bill that Republicans are, don't like this, anti-hemp provision, which, there's, a number of Republicans who support the hemp program, including THC hemp programs, it makes it difficult for the speaker to get that bill to pass. So, it's unlikely that the Andy Harris language as written will pass the full floor, but we'll see. And the Andy Harris language is interesting because it does 2 things. One we're most concerned about is this quantifiable amount of THC. Any THC that's quantifiable is now illegal. But if you strike that, the other change that it makes is it changes the Delta 9 THC standard, the 0.3% Delta 9 THC standard, which defines a cannabis plant as hemp, to a total THC. So it changes the Delta 9 to a total. And what that would do would be to contain every type of THC to the 0.3% standard, which may be more in line with what Congress intended in 2018. And what that could do if Congress were to pass a farm bill that changes the Delta 9 THC standard to a total THC standard, it would eliminate the THCA flower market, and it would restrain all synthetics into the 0.3% standard instead of allowing them to float outside because it's not Delta 9. So whether that's Delta 8 or HHC or whatever it is, it would be restrained to the 0.3% standard. That seems like a possible likely outcome that we all have to anticipate being a future reality. Some folks in the hemp industry aren't going to like that. Other folks in the hemp industry can navigate it. And I think most folks in the marijuana industry will be in favor of that because it could eliminate the THCA flower market that operators in the marijuana space see as competition. But to our earlier discussion, other operators in the cannabis space have seen the THCA flower market and have thought to themselves, well, we can do that. And so they are doing that, especially in California, where THCA hemp flower is illegal. There are California operators growing THCA flower and exporting that to other states, which is, totally fine. But if the total THC standard passes in the farm bill or in the appropriations package, then that THCA flower market would dry up. That might make the hemp market more palatable to the marijuana market.
Like a concession, right? Like it's like
they're friends now.
Or like in certain aspects. But I just want to reiterate one thing you said is like the way Congress intended in 2018, right? That was 7 years ago. They made a mistake and they're like, just getting around to fixing this mistake that we had. I don't know if this industry is big or not, but we made a mistake. We're trying to figure it out now.
I mean, that's not what the Schoolhouse Rocks version of this thing is. It tells us how this works, but this is kind of how it works. But I don't like the idea that it's I don't like the idea of calling this a loophole. A loophole seems like an intentional thing to exploit. I just think that no one in Congress understands mathematics or the metric system. And whose fault is that?
It's Congress's fault.
U.S. education system.
It's U.S. education, but that's Congress.
Department of Education.
And they're gone.
I've had to walk so many people through this. They're like, look, we sell gummies that weigh 5 grams. 0.3% of 5 grams is 15 milligrams. 15 milligrams will get you ripped. And that's Delta 9 THC, not even, Delta 9 THC, by the book, but 0.3% of 5 grams is a lot.
Yeah.
Kellen whiteboarded it for us a few years ago, and I was like, what are we doing? There's no one that explained this to someone else, right? Because there's no way a congressional person saw this and was like, no, this is exactly how we intended.
So in 2018, the only product on the shelf was CBD oils. I'm not going to open this one because it's still sealed, but CBD oils are droppers, with the eyedropper, like this stuff, right? And one dropper is 1 milliliter, and 1 milliliter is 1 gram because the metric system is perfect. And 0.3% of 1 gram is 3 milligrams. So in the 2018 Farm Bill, 0.3% equaled 3 milligrams because of the product that was on the market, but no one anticipated the sort of rapid product innovation that would happen in the space once it was legalized. And no one anticipated gummies, and that gummies would weigh more than oil, and that 0.3% of something that was heavier was more. Just didn't.
It was all based on GW Pharma, right? And they had just come out with the tincture, and that was kind of probably where the mindset was.
Probably more along like Charlotte's Web and Medterra.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like they were, the principle, like CBDMD, like the early first CBD brands, were selling oils. Like And that's really like no one was holding back or like not revealing their grand scheme for gummy innovation when 2018 Farm Bill passed. It just didn't exist. And then like on the other side of gummies, beverages came, and beverages have completely changed the game.
As everybody forecasted, right? There's an easy expectation that the most logical way people consume products, which is in drinking social form, it's very easy to consume. It's very natural. And once people recognize that, it exploded because not everyone wants to smoke and people like to feel nice and relaxed. And as you said before, alcohol is going way down. So what went way up?
You know, like no one anticipated the legalization of marijuana coming in the form of a can. Like this is not on anyone. Well, maybe, but show me the diary entry from 1995.
I can show you from 2021. I can show you. I yelled into the best. In fairness, and you're right. I didn't see it working out like this and all those other elements, but it happened faster than I ever envisioned. But I always thought beverage would be like the vehicle that brought the wider adoption. I just didn't see it play out like this.
And you know, it's happening so fast. Like liquor stores in Minnesota are saying that 15% of the revenue is THC beverages. And in Texas, it's like whole aisles of the total wine are THC beverages. Like it's not a blip. It is taking over the spirits industry. 64% of legal age Gen Z adults are not drinking alcohol. Like they're not. And they're not coming back either. They're not like they just never did and they're not gonna. And like
alcohol
no
companies
amount of
know
advertising,
this.
no amount of Bud Light ads are going to get those kids drinking.
No, and alcohol companies know this. And now I wonder too, right, what their influence is on all of these elements, how they're positioning themselves, what.
Well, I'll tell you.
Tell us.
So Discus is the Trade Association for Distilled Spirits Council. So that's the whiskey, bourbon, vodka makers of America. Support the Andy Harris Amendment to kill us dead. The WSWA, the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America, who by some accounts started this fight last year, opposed Discus and opposed the Andy Harris Amendment because they want to distribute the products that we now make. So the alcohol industry is divided between manufacturers and distributors as to which side that they're on here. And the retailers want to sell us too because they understand that, kids aren't buying alcohol anymore.
So in simplest forms, we are like this tiny lightweight, and now two heavyweights are coming in to fight on our behalf based on how things have worked out.
Yeah, like Godzilla versus Mothra type situation. Yeah.
Just kind of hanging out, being like, that's really cool that they're stepping in to defend us.
Right.
So
they mean well, for sure.
They want to help themselves, right? Everyone's always helping themselves. So I guess let's break it down. So it's June 26th today. Can we expect rescheduling in the next 2 months as a possibility?
Shit. I mean, Texas special session starts July 21st. So this is going to get hot then. So if there's going to be White House follow-on, it's going to happen along the close of the special. Just for like from a calendar perspective, that's what would make the most sense. This like the big splash has been made, and now that's going to settle. People are going to be talking, but then July 21st, it's game on in Austin. And I don't know how long these special sessions last. If it's a week, 2 weeks, if it's there until people get shit done. Like I'm new to the Texas game. I don't know how that works. But when Governor Abbott signs a bill that's not prohibition, that's would be the time that would be most productive for the White House to act.
And then Andy Harris's bill, his timeline for...
I don't know. So the congressional schedule is through July. There's an August recess. So I don't know what the plan is from the speaker's, perspective of moving this bill through. There's, so much going on in Congress right now where the ag appropriation bill ranks in terms of priority. But the speaker, is definitely hearing from members of Congress from his party that do not support the Andy Harris bill and may not vote for the bill as written without an amendment. So then you get an amendment approved by the Rules Committee to be a floor amendment, and then there's a vote on the floor amendment. And so will all the Democrats vote in favor of a floor amendment that some Republicans vote for? Like, that could happen. And then on the Senate side, you got the same process going on, but a step behind. So whether appropriations in the Senate get to the Senate floor before the August recess seems unlikely, but possible. And so then you're looking at, like the autumn of this year after the August recess when they get back before, this issue begins taking shape in Congress, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Last question, are you optimistic?
You can't do this without being just like a complete optimist all the time, because there's so much bad news all the time that you have to get it's always like, there's still a chance that we're going to get this right. And here's the path, right? And that path is the Texas veto has put a lot of wind in the sails of, I'm going to say the hemp industry, but in reality, it's also the entire cannabis industry writ large. Prohibition failed in Texas. It's a big deal. And it's a big deal not just for the hemp industry, but for the marijuana industry and the cannabis industry combined. And that's going to cause Republicans in the Texas congressional delegation to think twice about voting for the anti-Harris amendment. And it's going to give them cover for voting for a floor amendment that repeals the anti-Harris language. And it's going to give the president cover for rescheduling should he decide to make that a priority. So, it's a good time to be an optimist.
I love it. Optimism is back. So Jim, it's been down for a while.
Let me clarify. It's a good time to be an optimist narrowly on this issue.
Optimism is optimism. There's been too much downtrodden, right? It's good to be optimistic and to be back. So Jim, thanks for taking the time. For those who want to get in touch, they want to learn more, where's the best way to get in touch?
You can always come to cornbreadhemp.com, and then, on the socials, look for Cornbread Hemp. And then if you want to, wrestle with me on X, I'm at Jim Higdon.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.